Well, all of us, we know someone who's a lot. Here's what I mean by that. That one friend or a coworker or a family member who just drains your patience. Drains your patience. They've got rough edges. They're high maintenance. They're oftentimes obnoxious and has no control over their tongue and what they say. And sometimes those folks can be hurtful. We all know people like that. And when that happens, our attitude towards them will start to shift a bit. And we start evaluating, and we start judging. And it is usually in a moment like that that Jesus calls us out. And in the reading this morning, Jesus drops one of the most famous lines that's quoted, and that is, "Do not judge or you will be judged." What in the world are we to do with that? Especially when we have persons who are a lot. How do we deal with that? Now, you've heard that expression before. In fact, even people who don't really read the Bible, they quote that. Recently, there was an interview with Billy Joel. And the interviewer asked him the question, and it had to do with what he thought about a colleague of his who had a moral failure. And Billy Joel's response was, "Judge not, lest you be judged," and went on, and everything was okay. We use that all the time, but here's the catch. When that is such a popular phrase in our culture, it is also one of the most misunderstood statements in the Bible. And I'd like for us to chew on that a little bit this morning. When we read that, some people think that Jesus is saying, well, don't ever speak up when you see a wrong. But that's not it. Jesus isn't saying, don't make moral choices or don't take a stand. But what he is saying here is, when you look at someone else's life, you better proceed with caution. And here's the challenge we face as conscientious, Bible-believing, Christ-following Christians. We look at this. The challenge is, how can you stand for your convictions and not be obnoxious? It's key. You stand for what you believe to be right, but you're still someone people like to hang around. There's something there. Can we help someone without coming across as a, hey, I'm better than you, Christ follower? I think that's what Jesus is getting at. We all know people who are like that. So what is Jesus getting at here? He is essentially saying, if you're not on the jury, don't give the verdict, because there's some things we are on the jury for, and there are other things we are not on that jury, and part of the discernment is, where do we make those kinds of judgments? There are times in our lives when we do need to make judgment calls, and we are on that jury. Like, should I date that person? It's a judgment call. Or, should I let my kids go to that place? Or should I lend my car to a guy who's totaled 2 cars previously? We make judgment calls. We're on those kinds of juries. We're to do that. Jesus is saying, don't ever not make those decisions, because elsewhere he has a clue. And when I think of this in the Sermon on the Mount, I also like to relate to what Jesus also said about judgment elsewhere in John's Gospel, but I think he has a little clarity to this. And where Jesus said, stop judging by mere appearances, but instead he uses the word, judge correctly. So there is a dynamic thing in our judgment calls. And here's the thing that I think Jesus is getting at here. When we judge without knowing the facts, we can get it wrong. We can really get it wrong. And honestly, most of the time, we don't know the whole story. And it may not be our story to know anyway, because it's none of our business. I like what C.S. Lewis wrote. In a number of places, he would write about the dangers of prying into someone's inner spiritual state and trying to judge whether or not that person is truly a Christian. Many of us are aware of his famous book, Mere Christianity, where he details what led him as he moved from doubt to faith. And in the preference of Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis writes, and he stresses that Christianity is about following Christ, not about measuring who is in or who is out, or trying to sort people into categories of real versus not real. Here's what he wrote, and this was in the preface of Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis wrote, "It is not for us to say who, in the deepest sense, is or is not close to the Spirit of Christ. We do not see into men's hearts. We cannot judge, and are indeed forbidden to judge." So rule number one, if you're not on that jury, don't give a verdict. Let God handle that. That is a God thing. And I love how Jesus teaches. He's given this really kind of a hard in-your-face lesson about judging, and then he makes a statement that is hilariously clear in the word picture. He says this. He says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and not pay attention to the plank in your own eye?" I think we need a vaccine for plank eye disease. I think that would be a very good vaccine. And maybe we need some social distancing from that disease as well. Now, I realize that it's an artist, it's a kind of a crazy image of a guy with a 2x4 sticking out of his face and then going, "Hey, buddy, you got something in your eye." I'm sure they laughed at that. I think Jesus was humoring his audience. And I believe that image is supposed to make us laugh, but it is also not only to make us laugh, but to make us think, And we've all done this. We treat other people's speck like it is a huge, big deal. And our own plank like, well, it's no big deal at all. But before you criticize someone, Jesus says, just stop and check yourself and ask, am I really in a position to call this out? Are you on that jury? Perhaps you've got a plank problem. Perhaps. A problem to deal with. But then Jesus continues with a solution. And here's the solution to that. He goes on, he says, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. We look at ourselves first. Now, notice he doesn't say, don't ever help anyone. He says, make sure that you're living it first, or your credibility is going to go down the tubes. Don't say it before you're living it. I remember when we had kids at home, I couldn't tell my kids to keep their rooms clean if I kept my office if it looked like a hurricane hit it. I just couldn't do it. If I would be late for everything, I couldn't expect for them to be on time. If I couldn't control my temper, how could I expect my kids to control their temper? Parenting or leadership or friendship, it all works better when we're able to first lead by example that Jesus is getting at. Because our advice carries weight when life backs it up. That's when it carries weight. That's the most powerful evangelistic statement one could ever make. And then if this was not enough of a surprise as Jesus goes from judging to this kind of image of taking care of the speck and the log in our own eye, then he throws an absolute curveball. Like, well, what is he getting at? Because then the next statement, Jesus says, he says, don't give to dogs what is sacred. Don't take your pearls and throw them to pigs. What an image. What? Where are you going, Jesus? Was there a mind lapse? Or what are you after here saying that? At first, it sounds kind of harsh, doesn't it? It sounds very harsh. But I think this is what Jesus is saying here. And it's a code, and it is a harsh reality that not everyone wants your advice. Okay? Not everyone's asking for it. Not everyone is ready to hear your determination of truth. They may not be ready to hear that. And further, this is painful. Some people don't want the speck removed from their eye. They don't. They've grown comfortable to be looking at life through blurred, sloppy vision. They don't want to change. And if someone's not interested, they're not inviting it, they have grown accustomed to the speck in their eye. If they don't want to change, go on. Go on. But do it lovingly. But there will be others. There will be others that when you give them something that helps them grow, that helps them to where it connects the love of God in their life, they're going to treasure it. You're not casting your pearls before swines and things to be trampled under feet. They'll recognize that what you've been able to share with them, that's a pearl. Maybe it's someone, and you realize, hey, I care for you. You keep going the way you're going and doing what you're doing. Friend, that's going to kill you. Or, if you keep doing this, this person you're married is going to say, I'm done. And the person who can listen to that and they welcome that in, remarkable things can happen. So when someone shows you how to be a better person, a better parent, a friend, a leader, a Christ follower, grab that pearl and hang on to it. Now here's the takeaway for this morning. The thing to remember, and that is that your influence will work best when your life matches your words. Let God do the judging. And our job is to do the loving. When I think of the church's mission in evangelism, we have an evangelism team, and they're working tirelessly. How could we reach out? And they're coming up with all kinds of new ideas on evangelism, because the church, the local church, is one of the only institutions that exists for the benefit of people who are not already here. Think about it. You join a club, and it's for its members. Here's a club you join and say, now, how can we reach out to others? It's really a turnaround. And I would submit why we have programs and things that we do to encourage us and support us in that. The best outreach is what I would call lifestyle evangelism. Live through the love of Christ. Don't be a sacred jerk. Show the love of God in all you're about. Would you please stand? Let us pray. God, we want to thank you for reminding us today that you're the judge and we're not. We are quick to criticize, quick to size people up, and we are way too quick to forget about our own plank eye moments. Lord, help us this week to make a trade, to trade judgment for compassion. Help us to notice the good in people before we point out the bad. Give us the humility to look at our own hearts first, and the courage to live out our faith in a way that makes others curious about you and not turned off by us. Teach us to speak. Teach us when to stay quiet and to love people right where they are. We want our lives to shine with grace, not smugness. But most of all, Jesus, we thank you for loving us in our mess. Thank you for offering forgiveness instead of condemnation. And help us to give others that same gift. Amen.